My name's Travis Alexander. I'm a postdoctoral fellow in medical humanities at Rice, where I work on the Translational Humanities for Public Health project. We're joined today by Heather Hauser, who's a professor of English at UT Austin, and has just completed a book called Infowhelm. And we're here to talk with her a little bit about that book, some of the editorial projects that it's spun out, and what relevance that scholarship might have for a time of COVID. So Heather, can you tell us a little bit about Infowhelm, what you're after in this book?
Yeah, so the book and the subtitle gives maybe a little bit of information about it in that it's the subtitle is Environmental Art and Literature in an Age of Data. And so what I was interested in, I mean, initially and maybe most obviously is just the preponderance of environmental data and scientific information appearing in various art forms in the 21st century. So one aim is calling attention to that we shouldn't just think of the statistics about, say, extinction or climate crisis or uses of different scientific methodologies, whether they be from like climate modeling or natural history. We really shouldn't look at this as incidental. We shouldn't look over it or past it, but we should really look at it, that this is really forming like the raw material of art and constituting some of artists' methodologies. So that was one big takeaway, and also one of the interests of the project for me initially. But another thing that the book is getting at is really drawing attention to what I call entangled epistemologies, which can go by other phrases in other fields, but drawing attention to the way that we need the various ways of knowing offered by the sciences, the arts, by our bodies, by memory, by our emotions, like all of these intelligences, all these ways of knowing are really constitutive of environmental knowledge, always, but really urgently, I think, today with some of our environmental crises. So showing how the arts offer and really perform this kind of entanglement was another big project for me with the book. And so I think there are maybe more fine-grained things that I was getting at in the book, but those two were really crucial. And I would just say, like, part of the project and all of the work I've done thus far is really just showing that dialogue between art and science, how much dialogue there is and how much more there could be.
And just to draw out something that I think is implied in your answer there, do you see this moment which you're dating to an especial salience in the 21st century as unique, even from 20th century art, that the intrusion of scientific discourse and modes of expression into aesthetics? That's something that you see a kind of decisive break in?
I wouldn't call it a decisive break, but I would say there are certain things that mark today versus earlier periods, and I'm very careful and I'm very aware of sort of contemporary exceptionalism and want to avoid that, or a presentism. But one thing that the title of the book gets at, this idea of infowhelm, certainly there have been other prior moments of like rapid explosions of access to information, like including the dawn of the print era, for example. But I think one of the things that why the 21st century interests me with respect to this is just the availability of data and the processing that has to go on with it as we are facing really urgent crises that are both data-based, things like climate crisis, things like extinction, things like the exhaustion of lands and waters. All of that is like, these are very data-centric phenomena and crises, and the responses to them often rest on data, and at the same time that is contested, and the methodologies for producing it are very contested. So I don't think that this is the only moment where, you know, one confronts contested data in an urgent crisis. But you see that artists, like many of the rest of us, especially who have access to this media, the internet and social media and all of it, they're just really wrestling with the need to process this information and sort of make decisions either as individuals or even more importantly as collectives. And so that is what I sort of mark as really particular about the present, and also just all of the media forms artists are working in make this an interesting moment. Like in the book I include novels, poems, data visualizations on digital platforms, especially, but also like painting and photography. And so all of these forms are sort of circulating out there, these media, and also some genres within those media, that I think also makes this an interesting moment to look at. Again, not that some of those forms have been around a very long time, but the way that a lot of this media also circulates quite widely is interesting today.
Could you speak a little bit about the elephant in the room question, which is obviously you started writing this book and in fact probably finished it well before COVID, but in some ways it seems to me to speak, almost uncannily to the present moment, and I wonder if you could offer a little bit of even just in brief, why an attunement to the, let's say, datafication of art, or at least some kind of cross-pollination of expressive and quantitative media would be a kind of helpful conceptual armature for living through and hopefully beyond time of COVID.
Yes, it was. I did finish the book before, I guess the book came out 2 months into the pandemic, at least, when it really surged into consciousness in the US, I should specify. But so it was done prior to that, but became very relevant, even though I was mostly focused on environmental crises, which certainly have a public health dimension, but where my attention was elsewhere. But I think and I wrote a piece actually for the New York Review called "The COVID Infowhelm," getting at this. So just a little, I guess, more self-promotion. But that it is this, and well, I'll get to the thing I was about to say in a second. But this is, and we're still in it. I mean, I don't know about you all, but I live in Austin, Texas. And I think even more than in prior moments of COVID, I am checking this city's dashboards, right? And trying to understand just those fluxes in data and trying to then understand the responses of individuals, institutions, government leaders, and really like struggling with mismatches between those, right? And mismatches between, say, one public leader's message versus another, versus then how an institution, thinking here of my own institution, UT Austin, responds to all of that. So we have by no means left that moment, which I think maybe at the beginning of the pandemic, there was even more confusion in some respects of just like what data actually matters, what public health measures actually are most effective. I think some of that we know a bit more about, but the real uncertainty and disconnect and dissonance endures. And so I think things like uncertainty, disconnect, dissonance, anxiety, despair, all of that those are things that I think artists now are wrestling with and probably incorporating into their art. I mean, we've certainly already seen some pandemic art coming out. I'll admit I don't have my finger on the pulse of that at the moment, but I know certainly novels are incorporating it. We've seen TV shows, certainly data visualizations and like visual art of all kinds have started to incorporate this experience of the pandemic. But I do imagine in the years ahead, like there will be this use of the Infowhelm, grappling with the Infowhelm in this context that will be really fascinating, because it is a phenomenon that, like I mentioned earlier, requires a lot of forms of intelligence to really make any sense of it and to live through it.
Yeah, so I guess just by way of conclusion, then, could you point us to maybe some work you're in the process of right now, either that builds on these attentions to data and uncertainty that build on a relationship to COVID, or that depart for another direction?
Well, one thing that, I mean, mentioning like entangled epistemologies or multiple ways of knowing intelligences, one thing related to that that I'm working on with a co-editor, Stephanie Lemenager, is a special issue of the journal ASAP, which is the journal of that organization by that name. And it's called Becoming Undisciplined. And it's actually a forum of about 12 or so contributors' pieces in different genres, like really thinking about what it means to undiscipline oneself in the face of various crises of authority and just crises such as climate and the pandemic and, you know, what's happening in the humanities and universities. So I think that's relevant to this question of how does one reckon with and even take advantage of or like learn from and grow out of uncertainty. And then a project of my own that I'm working on is really thinking about reproductive justice in the context of climate change. And that doesn't have a strong connection to COVID, except insofar as I think we are seeing a lot of attention to the family and family structure, and also attention to like changes in birth rates out of COVID-19. So while it's not like definitive of that project, that is, the pandemic's not like definitive of that project for me, it's certainly shading or bringing, you know, new angles to my thinking about others' thinking, and just a general confrontation with family structure and gender and racial inequality under COVID-19. So those are two things I can point to.
All right. Well, then I guess we'll go ahead and wrap up. And I would encourage people to check out Dr. Hauser's project page on the Translational Humanities website. Also, go get a copy of Infowhelm. And just again, you said the special issue is coming out in ASAP.
Yes, it's likely going to be early 2022. It's actually a forum. I always slip and call it an issue, but so that'll be, yeah, early 2022 of the ASAP journal.
All right, perfect. Well, thanks for joining us, and we'll keep posted on your work then.